Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Crop Hour. This is our last week for sunflower and pulses, or our last day of the week, I should say. Um, with today, we're going to be talking about some diseases of sunflowers and pulse crops. If you have any questions, again, as we mentioned before, just drop them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll address those at the end. But I'm going to turn it over to Madalyn Shires. She's our extension plant pathologist based in Brookings, and she's going to be talking to us about some diseases today. Take it away.
All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to be going through some sunflower and pulse diseases and then just a few others that are kind of in this realm of crops. I will start a disclaimer at this. I am still learning the sunflower and pulse crop world. If you have questions about specific fungicides or things like that, I may not be able to answer those, but I can do my best to, get back to you with answers if needed. But yeah, so here we go. The first one I'm starting with is what is considered to be one of the most widespread sunflower diseases in the state, and that's Phoma black stem, commonly called Phoma. It is a fungal disease caused by a Phoma species of fungus. The yield loss associated with disease is extremely rare. However, there have been a few reported cases of minor yield loss with high disease pressure. One note about this disease is that stem weevils can transmit the disease higher up into the stems and make it a little more aggressive. There are specific weather conditions that encourage this fungus to grow. So those are, it's going to be rainfall kind of in the middle of the season, early to middle of the season, high humidity, and temperatures at 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The fungus does survive on crop residues, and it can appear at any time in the season, though you're likely to see it later in the season. Some symptoms of Phoma. There are some leaf symptoms, though they're kind of general, so you may not associate those with it. There is chlorosis and necrosis of the leaf veins and petioles. The most common symptom is going to be those stem symptoms where there's a jet black lesion at the base of the petiole on the stem. The lesions will have definite borders and almost appear shiny as they get older. An important note and a way to differentiate Phoma from some of the other diseases I'll be talking about is that Phoma does not cause damage to the pith and it does not cause lodging. So here are some examples of Phoma. You can see on the left that is just kind of that typical symptom, a large black lesion at the petiole on the stem where it's attached to the stem. And then you can see on the right, a typical field that has Phoma, and you can see that the Phoma is typically lower on the stem. Management of Phoma, crop rotation with a non-host. There's not a ton of other hosts for it, so it should be pretty easy to rotate. Avoiding planting near fields that have crop residues from a moderate or high previous infection will help lower the amount of Phoma. There are some foliar fungicides, but they are very rarely cost effective. So honestly, kind of using some of these crop rotation and planting avoidance is probably your best management strategy. The next one is Phomopsis stem canker. This is the other major stem type disease that we see here in South Dakota. It is another fungal disease caused by a Diaporthes species. This disease is said to be the most economically important sunflower disease here in the state. Yield losses of more than 40% have been observed in high disease pressure areas. However, it was noted in that same report that disease severity varies greatly from year to year and location to location. However, it is emphasized that it's important to know which disease you're dealing with. and knowing that you have phomopsis so that you can take some management steps to try to lessen the impacts of this disease. Like phoma, the phomopsis fungus overwinters on crop residues. There are, again, weather conditions that encourage the growth of this disease. That's going to be wet weather, high humidity at 90% or more, and temperatures of 88 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. There are also some leaf symptoms associated with this disease, and I'll have those on the next slide. But you'll see brown colored lesions that eventually spread from kind of a wedge area on the leaf into the petiole and then onto the stem. The stem symptoms is the one that is more commonly observed, and that's a small brown spot that becomes larger and in a tan to light brown in color. And I have a comparison slide to kind of show you phoma versus phomopsis. The lesions of phoma are typically 6 inches or more in length, which is different from phoma, where it's usually smaller and focused just right around that petiole. With phomopsis, severe infections will actually degrade the pith and lead to lodging. So again, it's important to know which one of these stem diseases you're dealing with to make sure that you're taking good management steps. This is a leaf symptom associated with phomopsis stem canker. And you can kind of see it starts in kind of a wedge shape and it's working toward the stem of that plant. This is a phomopsis stem lesion. So you can see it's at that petiole and you can kind of see the difference in color where this is more of a tan color, whereas phoma is more of a black color. So I think the next, it'll be in a couple of slides. I'll have a comparison. Management of phomopsis, if you know that it's a problem, their rotation with non-host crops, and examples given would be corn or wheat or sorghum. Elimination of crop residues will do a lot to lessen the impacts of this disease. Controlling volunteer and wild sunflowers as they serve as alternate host. Similar to phoma, don't plant near fields that had really bad previous infections to kind of avoid that residue. There are hybrids that have partial resistance. And then there are also fungicides that can be applied at the R1 stage. However, the efficacy of those fungicides is mixed. It's said that they can be affected by the weather. They can also be affected by several other factors. So it's something to be carefully considered if you're going to try to put out a fungicide for phomopsis. And here's that comparison picture. So you can see that phoma, which is on the left or on the right, and phomopsis is on the left. So you can kind of see that difference in color, and you can see that the lesions for phomopsis, they're longer and spreading, whereas that phoma is just more of a circular lesion and it's just kind of in that general area and doesn't look to be moving. All right, a next disease is going to be sclerotinia, wilts, and rots. There's several different names for these diseases based on the location of symptoms. So basal stalk rot, mid-stem rot, head rot. Sclerotinia head rot is the most common here in South Dakota. This disease is a fungal disease caused by Sclerotinia sclerosum. Its common name in most of your other crops is going to be white mold. And people will refer to this disease as white mold on sunflowers. It's just less common. Yield losses of 10 to 70% have been reported in association with sclerotinia. So for disease development to occur, the fungus survives as a sclerotia in the soil, and a sclerotia is going to look like a black rice grain or rat droppings, depending on who you talk to. And it is a hardened structure that survives in the soil, and it remains in the soil for many, many years. So identification of this disease and knowing what you're dealing with can help you make better management practices and decisions to help lessen impacts of this disease. I'm going to talk specifically about head rot symptoms and how the disease develops, since that is the most common here in South Dakota. So in the case of head rot, that sclerotia that is in the soil, it produces mushrooms, and the mushrooms release spores, and the spores are able to move with wind and rain and, livestock or wildlife or humans, like anything can move those spores. Once the spore has landed on a plant where there's free moisture, the spore is able to germinate and begin infection. So the disease and the disease symptoms of this disease are a soft brown colored lesion on the back of the sunflower head. The lesion will grow and eventually cover the whole back of the head. And many times you'll see a white fungal growth that develops on the face of the head. As the disease advances closer to harvest, the head may actually shred and fall apart, and it's said to look like a broom is at the top of the plant. The sclerotia, so that hardened structure that stays in the soil, is produced in the head, and and then once that head falls to the ground, it gets into the soil, and that's how we continue that disease cycle. And here's an example of the sclerotia head rot on a sunflower. You can see that the whole back of the head is rotted. You can actually see the white fungal growth here. So kind of at the edges of those lesions on that stalk. And then these are typical symptoms of the basal stalk rot and the midstem rot. So on the left, the basal stalk rot, you can see those plants have lodged, they've tipped over. You can see the brown lesions that even have a little bit of a white color to them from the mold growing in that lesion. On the right, you can see where that stem has broken and it has shredded from weakness. And again, these are just kind of common symptoms associated with the other locations that this fungus can affect. So management of sclerotinia is rotation with non-host crops such as wheat or corn. It's really important to remember, and I'll emphasize this a few more times, that white mold affects tons and tons and tons of other crops. It's over 350 different species. So soybeans, most of your pulse crops, those are all good alternate hosts for this disease, and it will continue its life cycle, and it will continue to grow in amount in the soil. Control of volunteer or weedy broadleaf alternate host crops. So again, just keeping in mind that if you know this is a problem in your field, making sure that you're selecting crops that the disease cannot reproduce on. Avoid practices that lead to a dense canopy. If you've heard of this disease before in soybeans, we talk about trying to keep as much air in the canopy, and it's similar to sunflowers, just try to keep water from standing on the plant. There are some partially resistant hybrids out there that are available if this disease is a problem in your fields. There is some research out there that there are fungicides that can be applied, but most of the research suggests that the fungicides are kind of cost prohibitive. So you would want to carefully consider fungicide application and the cost before utilizing those. Another disease that we saw a lot on garden sunflowers, wild sunflowers, and commercial sunflowers in 23 was sunflower rust. This is a fungal disease caused by a Puccinia species. Sunflower rust is very widespread across South Dakota. Yield loss is highly variable, and oftentimes it's rare. There has been an extreme case in North Dakota where it was up to 80%. So it is important to know if you're dealing with this disease. The yield impacts are dependent on the plant growth stage that the fungus begins infection, as well as the weather conditions. For rust to develop, It's important to keep in mind that this rust is specific to sunflowers. It does grow on all types of sunflowers. The fungus can overwinter here. It's not sensitive to the cold. And in uncommon cases, it can begin infection at the vegetative stage, but it's extremely uncommon here in South Dakota for that to occur. Most frequently, the fungus begins infection closer to the reproductive stage, and that's when we'll start seeing the symptoms, and that will be on the next slide. The development of disease occurs with prolonged leaf wetness and air temperatures of 55 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So here is the most common symptom of sunflower rust. It is going to be pustules that are on the bottom and the top of the leaf. You can wipe those off and your finger will probably have an orange color on it, almost like Cheeto dust. Those are rust spores, so make sure you don't go touch other sunflowers because you will spread the disease. And yeah. If rust is a big problem in your field, there is obviously removing the overwintering host, which would be wild and volunteer sunflowers. Avoid planting near fields that have residues from a moderate to high rust infection. There are some cultivars with resistance and or tolerance to rust. Removal of infected residues if the disease was moderate to high. There are also foliar fungicides. However, for it to be cost effective, the rust must be severe or it must have appeared early in the season at that vegetative stage when the plant is small. Otherwise, you're not going to get much benefit out of fungicides. Another disease that I want to mention on sunflowers, and it's because we've seen it on several other crops across the state in 23, is charcoal rot. This is another fungal disease and it's caused by Macrophamina species. The reason we're seeing it a lot is that disease development occurs during periods of hot, dry weather. And if you've been here in South Dakota for the last few years, you know that we've had very hot, very dry weather for most of our growing season. And this fungus has become a large problem, especially in our soybeans. We're seeing it in corn. It can also affect sorghum. So just kind of keep your eye out. If you're seeing some weird symptoms that you've not seen before, it could be charcoal rot. The symptoms are going to occur in reproductive growth stages when we have high temperatures and low soil moisture. The most common symptom is a gray colored lesion on the stem at soil line, and I have pictures on the next slide. If charcoal rot is a problem, rotate with a non-host crop, and if you are able to add soil moisture throughout the season, that is great, but I know most people are not able to irrigate their sunflowers. Wheat would be an example of a non-host crop. So if this is a problem for you, it would be important to do a little bit of research and understand the other crops that this fungus affects. And here are the most common examples of charcoal rot. The symptom on the left is where the stem has been split and you can see the fungus growing within that pith and reproducing and producing, and it makes this gray colored look. And then the picture on the right is the gray colored lesions at the soil line associated with this disease. These are just a few others that have been reported on sunflowers in South Dakota, although at very low levels. The first picture on the top left is associated with verticillium wilt. So the pith is discolored and there's streaks in the pith. The pictures on the bottom, one is associated with rhizopus head rot, and you can kind of see that the head is just rotting. The next is downy mildew on sunflowers. Again, extremely uncommon in South Dakota, although they were having problems with it in Iowa this year or in 23. So I just wanted to throw out a picture of what that kind of looks like. And then the picture on the right is bacterial leaf spot. Again, most of these diseases are super rare in South Dakota, but definitely something to keep an eye out if you're seeing weird symptoms that you've not noticed before. So I'm gonna talk a little bit on some pulse crop diseases. Our most common pulse crops here are going to be chickpeas or garbanzos, and those are said to be the more disease-prone crop. Lentils, dry peas, lupines. Powdery mildew is one of the most problematic diseases that shows up. And so powdery mildew, if you've not heard of it before, it's a fungal disease, and it typically appears late into the growing season as you're getting close to harvest. According to an article from Ruth Beck a few years ago, the late planted peas are more susceptible to the disease, but conducive weather can make the disease occur on, early planted or late planted. Also, a heavy crop canopy can make the disease more likely to occur because it's going to allow for water to stand on the leaves and allow for fungal infection to occur. Symptoms of powdery mildew. So warm weather with cool nights and a heavy dew is going to be the perfect conditions for this disease to begin. The symptoms are going to start as a small white fungal spots on the oldest leaves of the plants. As the disease progresses, the fungus is going to move up the plant and start infecting stems and pods. Management is going to be resistant varieties if possible. It's not always possible to get those. There are also fungicides that can be applied if the disease risk is high or if it showed up earlier in the growing season than expected. And here are some symptoms. So the picture on the left, you can see on that leaf, there's just little white spots that are kind of looking like spider webs that are just starting on the leaf. The picture on the right is a more advanced extreme case of powdery mildew, and you can see the stems, leaves, pods, everything's affected by that white powdery growth. One thing that was pointed out in the article from Ruth Beck is that there is that natural white film on pea leaves, and you kind of want to know the difference in the symptoms. So the picture on the right is going to be that powdery mildew. So it's that white powdery spiderwebby looking growth. The picture on the left is kind of that natural film. So, just kind of to keep in mind so that the two diseases don't get confused, or the two, not diseases, the two conditions don't get confused. So a few of these slides I got from a colleague. Impacts of powdery mildew is going to be reduced yield, significantly reduced seed size, premature crop maturity, severe mildew dust at harvest, which can be problematic for machine operators. So definitely powdery mildew, kind of keep it in mind. I have a few seedling diseases associated with pulse crops now. So Pythium seed decay and damping off. This fungus begins infection as the plant is germinating. The conditions that are going to favor Pythium infection is going to be high soil moisture and low to moderate soil temperatures. The symptom that you're going to see, you can see on the in the photos, but it's going to be seed decay and damping off. Which again, you're going to have poor stand establishment because of that. So definitely one of those to kind of keep in mind if you're seeing a lot of damping off occurring in fields. Another common damping off disease is rhizoctonia. This one occurs with moderate to high soil moisture and low soil temperatures. Again, poor stand establishment because you've had damping off and seed decay. There's also root rot associated with this, and you can see that in those pictures where it's a sunken reddish to brown lesion on the stem. You can see in that left picture that the stem is very small and tiny, where it has sunk in due to this infection. Another one that can be a problem is Aphanomyces root rot, and this does affect pulse crops, but it can also affect alfalfa. So the conditions that favor infection of the Phantomyces is going to be high soil moisture and high soil temperature. So it is definitely one to kind of keep in mind as crops are planted this year. Just be looking for damping off symptoms. Another root rot and wilts disease is going to be fusarium. So the conditions that favor infection are going to be kind of any range of soil moisture, but also high soil temperatures. So you can see in the picture on the right, the stem actually has a pink streak in it, and that is due to fusarium. And then the picture on the left, you can just see that damping off is occurring in those plants. Another one that can occur on pulse crops, and I'm bringing this up because it is related to sunflowers, is Sclerotinia rot or white mold. This is the same pathogen that is on sunflowers, and it's been reported on chickpeas, lentils, canola, dry peas, so it can affect most of the pulse crops. The picture on the left kind of shows an extreme example of white mold on a chickpea. And you can see the white moldy growth, and then these are the fungal fruiting bodies, the sclerotia that's being produced that will end up in the soil. The picture on the right is a plant that has severe white mold infection and is starting to die at the top due to the white mold preventing transport of nutrients. And then I'm just going to mention a few diseases on canola and safflower. I know they're very minor crops, but just in case anyone on here is working with them. Blackleg of canola is the most economically devastating disease in canola. It's been reported from time to time in South Dakota. It is a fungal disease. The symptoms of it is irregular brown to tan lesions on cotyledons, and you can see that in the picture. There's a brown lesion on that cotyledon. The reproductive structures for this fungus grow in those lesions. In advanced infection, you'll have stem lesions form, rotting occur, stem cankers. The seedling infection is the most damaging to the plant. So it has been reported, and I think I have a few more, I have a few more pictures of it. So these again are some pictures from North Dakota and from Canada of this disease. And I know I kind of sound like a broken record probably, but I just want to emphasize like white mold, it again affects many other crops. So this is another one. This is white mold or Sclerotinia rot on canola. And you can see you can see the white moldy growth that's occurring on those stems, and how poorly the plant looks. So it is a very damaging disease. And similar to the others, you're going to have brown to white mushy lesions on the flowers and stems. And then the lesions are going to become larger and kind of that bleached white color. And you can actually see the fungal growth whenever the humidity is high, similar to other crops. And then here's a few more examples of Sclerotinia. So stem on the far left, you can see kind of a zoomed in picture of a smaller stem lesion. The middle is a more advanced infection where the fungus has completely kind of destroyed those plants. And then on the far right, that is an example of the Sclerotinia. So those small black structures that are going to overwinter in the soil. One of the more common diseases that's reported kind of around South Dakota on safflower is alternaria leaf spot. And those are large, brown, somewhat irregular spots that you're going to see on the leaves and the flower bracts. Alternaria is a fairly common fungal disease across a wide range of crops. We found it's on a lot of horticultural crops in 23. So it is just one to kind of keep in mind because our environment does seem to be really conducive for disease development. And the pictures just show you kind of the common symptoms of that. And it's just those brown lesions with a little bit of chlorosis around the lesion, and they're on the leaves. A few other safflower diseases. There is safflower rust. So it's a different species of rust from sunflower rust, but it can, the same environmental conditions will encourage the growth of that rust. And safflowers, like so many others, do also get white mold. So there is a example of a severe damage from the sclerotinia or white mold. This is just a few. They're just kind of a, hey, flaxes do get disease. We don't see it a lot here. Aster yellows is probably the biggest risk for flax here in South Dakota, just because we get aster yellows in wheat. So if you grow flax, just kind of keep in mind out that it can get some diseases, and just keep an eye out on that. And then I have a few references. And then here's my contact information. Also, Connie Strunk, if you've not met her before, she's our plant pathology field specialist stationed in Sioux Falls. And then also, because I have a couple of minutes, I also serve as the director of our plant diagnostic clinic on campus. So we are able to diagnose and give you management recommendations of plant diseases and a lot of times other problems on plants. So if you have any questions or would like to submit a sample, please let me know, or you can also just look up SDSU Plant Diagnostic Clinic and you'll be able to find our page with submission instructions and tons of other information. So, and for a basic sample, it's only $15 to kind of know what's going on in your field. So please consider submitting samples to the diagnostic clinic. The other nice thing is that when you send samples to the diagnostic clinic, once I know that there's a problem within these crops, so if we're seeing tons of sunflower rust or whatever, it gives me information to be able to kind of put together some other fact sheets and information that will hopefully give resources to all of you that work with these plants. And with that, that is everything I have.
All right, thanks, Madalyn. So it doesn't look like we have anything showing up in the Q&A or the chat. I did have a couple questions for you. One was, so I know, yeah, you're definitely talking about sclerotinia and the kind of issues with that. I remember, I guess with the exception of your charcoal rot, it seems like, yeah, if we have any wet weather, obviously most of our disease issues are going to be a little bit worse. I think the worst sclerotinia I've seen was in 2019. It was just a really wet growing season, pretty cool, just perfect conditions. And remember doing our sunflower survey that year. It happens on odd years, and yeah, there was just a field that was just absolutely decimated with sclerotinia. I mean, it was just widespread, these patches, and the heads were rotting, the stalks, like everything was just, you could just basically pull it apart. It was kind of wild.
Yeah.
But I know you talked about like the crop rotation. So I guess that's just something that is probably really important if you've had sclerotinia in, a previous crop. I assume there's going to be carryover there if you plant something susceptible that the next.
Yes. Yeah. So sclerotinia has been shown to be in the soil anywhere from 5 to 10 years a lot of times. So, one time of sclerotinia issues is not going to have not going to leave a lot in the soil, but if you have it show up, every time you're putting a susceptible crop in the field, that just increases that inoculum. So it's entirely possible to have really big problems if don't know which disease you're dealing with. So yeah, definitely crop rotation is the best way to manage it. there's a lot of studies out there on sunflowers. I did see this morning that similar to soybeans, wide rows, trying to keep your canopy open as much as possible. And those are some of the same recommendations for sunflowers. So there are some management recommendations out there, but again, just knowing which disease you're dealing with is very, very important.
Right. So we do have a question that came in here through the Q&A. This person asks, what are the best management practices to control diseases in canola and field peas?
That's a pretty broad question.
Yeah, pretty broad.
I definitely would recommend, obviously I run the diagnostic clinic and I advocate for us knowing what diseases we're dealing with and then making the management practice decisions based off of that. So, a lot of it in general, broad stroke terms is going to be managing your residues, rotating away from non-host crops, utilizing fungicides if possible. It's not always an option. But again, I advocate, sending in samples to the diagnostic clinic and knowing what disease you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a bacterial disease and you put out a fungicide, not only do you not have disease control, you've now wasted money because fungicides don't control bacterial diseases. So definitely advocate for knowing what disease you're dealing with and then making your management decisions based off of that.
Yeah, when in doubt, send it to the plant diagnostic clinic.
Yeah.
So my other question was, it's regarding hail. So that's something we definitely get plenty of West River. It's
Mhm.
always a concern. It seems like during the month of June, sometimes when it rains, it hails. Sometimes it just hails. Are there any diseases that we need to be particularly concerned about following a hail event? I can think of one would be that rhizopus. I've seen that
Mhm.
showing up in sunflowers, but is there anything else that we need to watch for we get a hailstorm?
Yeah, so your bacterial diseases, while there aren't a ton in sunflowers, there was that bacterial leaf spot. So a lot of bacterial diseases will take advantage of damage to the plants and start disease. So that's definitely a possibility after hail. And like you mentioned, there's a few of those fungal diseases that, like the rhizopus, that are just kind of free living. But once the plant has damage and has taken stress, they take advantage and begin infections. So just kind of, knowing if there's other fungal problems near your specific field that's been hail damaged will kind of indicate what your risk might be. And then again, bacterial, in like all other crops, bacterial diseases really take advantage of hail damage.
Okay, makes sense. Well, thank you very much
Yep.
for joining us. I guess I think we'll go ahead and launch the poll, and I will share my screen. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I wanted to thank everybody again for joining us today and this week for Crop Hour. So come on back next week. We'll have a whole new batch of topics coming up here the rest of this month. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.